This is the personal narrative writing lesson, thinking about how writers will experiment with different types of leads for their personal narratives. A few things you're going to need to get started for today's work. You're going to need the handout, Techniques for Writing Memorable Leads. You need a paper clip, highlighter, pen or pencil. Once you have those things, we're going to get started. And writers, you have to know that today is actually a really exciting day. Instead of generating new personal narratives today, you're going to look back over your whole collection of stories and choose just one. Just one story that we're going to call a seed idea, meaning we're going to kind of nourish and grow this seed idea and to become our actual first piece of published writing. And it's a little daunting to wrap your mind around the fact that after everything you've written, today I'm going to make you choose just one. This is a time when you really have to pay attention to that little voice as you reread and find a story that whispers that there's just something about this story that has the potential to become a really important piece of writing. Remember, this doesn't mean that the personal narrative is already an incredible piece of writing. It might be, but it might just be an idea that you can develop into a powerful and more meaningful story. So I'm going to stop talking right now. You're going to pause the video. I want you to reread your notebook, and you're going to start to find a story that could function as your seed idea. You're welcome to reread anything that you've written in the Create section. So this is where you're going to look back over all of the entries that you have, which again, Mrs. Merkowitz doesn't have her entries written. She will someday. You're going to reread all these entries, and you're going to decide which one is going to be my seed idea. When you find that one, you're going to take a paper clip and put the paper clip right at the top. And I know that my seed idea is going to be when Tyler cut his finger this summer. Very traumatic, and it's a story that keeps coming back to me no matter how many of these different stories I look at in here. This is the one that just is kind of almost whispering and speaking to me. And now that you're back, you probably remember from years past that writers don't just settle on a seed idea and then we get right into writing the book or the story. We have to actually warm up a little bit with some different practice runs. Just like, dancers might practice before a performance and musicians practice before a concert. One of the best ways to rehearse your story is to do some storytelling. So you're actually going to pause the video, and with your writing partner, you are going to practice telling the story. Practice telling your seed idea. I want to hear you using the same dramatic storytelling voice that you use when you're in the hallway, when something unbelievable has just happened to you and you bump into your best friend and tell him or her all about it. Partner 2, you're going to lean in and expect to get goosebumps from their story. So pause the video and take turns with your writing partner telling your story, not reading from the page, but actually closing the book and telling the story. And now that you're back, I want you to know that that was amazing. The stories that you actually told with your partner actually made them come to life. It seemed to me that you told your stories. You started to figure out what you wanted to show about your characters and how you wanted to make your partner react to certain parts of the story. That's exactly why we might storytell our story before we put it on paper. Today I want to teach you that writers also rehearse for writing by trying out several different leads. And for this example, you're also going to need a copy of the mentor text, Everything Will Be Okay. And I didn't tell you that ahead of time that you're going to need this. So if you need to pause the video and grab your mentor text, make sure you have that. I'm going to use that as part of my lesson. And you know how much the first sentence or paragraph of a story, what writers will actually call the lead, we know that that matters. That can make or break if you're going to continue reading a story. The first bit of text on a page has the big job of grabbing the reader's attention, making the reader want to put everything else aside just so he can hunker down and read the story. Authors try out different leads, looking for the one that will set them up to write a great story. So let's go back to this mentor text by author Jim Howe and see what this famous author did with the start of Everything Will Be Okay, something that makes his leads so powerful. Remember, whenever a story takes your breath away, that's your cue to pause and study the writer's moves. Your goal is to bring all that you can learn from your mentor text into your own personal narrative writing. So I'm going to go ahead and start rereading this beginning, and I'm going to start to try to notice what are things that the author is doing that I could pull out. And so if I reread, the kitten is a scrawny thing, with burrs and bits of wood caught in its coat where it still has fur and pus coming out of its eyes and nose. Ooh, gross. Its big baby head looks even bigger at the end of such a stick of a body. If I pause right there, the first thing I'm noticing is that the author is right away, right in the moment of his story, recalling and zooming in on these tiny details that must have caught his attention at the time. The missing fur, the leaky eyes, the stick, skinny body. He must have really replayed that scene in his mind bit by bit to remember what he saw and felt at that time. I'm also noticing that as I keep going, I think he's going to start talking to the kitten, but let me keep reading. I'm not sure. Might be ahead of myself. I found it in the woods at the end of my street where I play most days with my friends. This time I was alone. Lucky for you I was, I think. Otherwise, David or Claude might have decided you'd be good practice for their slingshots. Those two can be so mean, I think to myself. Oh, that's where I was thinking. So this part right here, where it's italicized, this is where he's saying it in his head, but it's almost like he's talking to the cat. That's his inner thinking. I'm going to write that in here. That's his include inner thinking. We might actually even call that, including dialogue, but the inner thinking. This inner thinking right at the start of the story certainly pulls me into his world and makes me curious about him. It makes me want to keep reading. But why is that? Well, this inner thinking, like I said, is kind of like dialogue. He's actually talking to the kitten. It's just silently in his head. But I think what's really powerful about his inner thinking at the start of the story is the ways it allows him to drop some hints about what might his story be really about. When he's thinking about how David and Claude can be mean, it seems like he's showing us that this is a lonely time in his life. I mean, these people right here are making him so that he might actually be lonely. The narrator could really use a little more love in his life. Maybe if it is even from a scrawny little sick kitten. So what I'm noticing is that this lead can pull us right into the story by including very precise details, like these examples. So I'm going to put details. And a lead can also pull us into the story by including inner thinking. And so if we pause real quick from this work and go to the handout that I gave you, I want you to put this handout in the Learn section of your writer's notebook. So pause the video and get this handout put in the Learn section. And now that we're back, we know that two things on this list so far are techniques for writing memorable leads. The first one was the example with all the little smallest details. And the second example I showed you was how an author might include inner thinking to hint at what the story is really about. Now, if I go back to the work here, our mentor text, remember I'm just rereading the lead of this story to notice what the author has done in his lead that I could try too. So I'm not going to stop there. I want to keep studying his lead and adding to what I just noticed. When I go off to rehearse a few leads for my own personal narrative, I'll be able to try out what this author is teaching me. So now you're going to pause the video and you're going to continue the rest of this introduction, thinking that the introduction is only going to go to right here. And with your writing partner, I'm going to call this partner work, I want you to reread this part of the introduction and try to notice what else is this author doing, aside from including details and inner thinking. What else is the author doing to hook you into the story? Now that you're back, hopefully you've thought about adding a few more things that the author is doing. One thing I definitely want you to make sure you picked up on is that you notice that the author is going ahead and putting in some precise actions of the characters. And so right in here, he's talking about stroking its scabby head until the meowing is replaced. So right in here, he's putting in actions, helping readers to see how one action leads to another. And then we know that he's also using exact words. And so those are two other techniques that authors will often put into their introductions. So now we've got 4 strategies that we could try out with our own personal narrative. So now comes the independent part of this work. Today what I want you to think about is we looked at 4 different ways that you could try an introduction for your writing, knowing that we have to practice a few different attempts in order to get one that's going to work perfectly. And so what you're going to do independently is you're going to find that seed idea that you picked in the beginning of this lesson. So my seed idea is Tyler cutting his finger. And what I need to do is think of, I just learned 4 different techniques for writing an introduction. I'm going to pick 2, maybe 3 to try out and rehearse, experiment with, whatever you want to call it, different beginnings. And so you can see that I set up a page here in the Create section of my writer's notebook. You could set this page up where you have the title, Begin with a Strong Lead, and then I want you to pick 2 or 3 of the 4 different techniques. Remember, the 4 different techniques is what you just put in to the Learn section of your notebook. So that's the smallest details, inner thinking, precise actions, and exact words. You've got 4 different techniques to try. I want you to pick 2 or 3 of them where you're actually going to try out for your seed idea. I'm going to put on here too that my seed idea is Tyler when he cut his finger. Okay, so I decided to try a dialogue one. That was the exact words. I decided to try an action one. And then this one I kind of came up with on my own. This wasn't one of the 4, but I thought maybe about a flashback lead. That might be a little trickier, but I'm thinking I could come up with something kind of cool as like I flash back into time, or I flash forward, however you want to do that, to go back and tell the story. In the end, when you draft out your leads, it might look something like this, and let me zoom in so you can see. This is an example from a student where they have 3 different leads you can see here, where they've actually written the lead. So this first one is a talking lead where they have dialogue, exact words. The second one is an action lead where they feel something. Now notice they also included dialogue in it, and that's fine to kind of blend a couple different types together. And this is where the idea of a flashback came into play. But you could also do any of the ones that are on our handout to include. So inner thinking or small details are ones I didn't give examples of. You could include those. But in the end of today's writer's workshop, you should have sketched out into your Create section different examples of at least 2, maybe 3 different types of leads. Give it a try.